Hello guys and welcome to episode 57, I think it is, of the Beat Your Backlog podcast, a podcast discussing the things gamers like to put off, get to another day, and oh yes, will definitely beat later, their backlog. I'm your host Adam, and today we are diving into the weird and wonderful mind of Toby Fox in his follow-up game to Undertale, Deltarune's chapters 1 and 2. And Undertale is one of the most beloved indie games ever, and unusually is one that I've never actually managed to beat. I've tried playing through it 3 times in the past, and on each of them I've given up because I found the game's combat a little bit too vague, and especially so if you're trying to do a pacifist run of the game. However, though the combat of the game is not my favourite, I do appreciate how good the game is, especially its story. And Toby Fox, in my opinion, is a genius, and his humour comes through the game's writing with its fourth wall breaking jokes and its endearing characters. That's why when Deltarune Chapter 1, so Fox's new episodic project, released all the way back in 2018, I decided to give it a go. Fox announced that Deltarune would be made of 7 chapters in total, and when I played Chapter 1 all the way back in 2018, I absolutely loved it and reviewed it on Switch Indie Fix. But I never had played Chapter 2 because I had dropped out of gaming when it released in 2021. And what is, and is still surprising, is that Deltarune Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 have been released for free all this time, and there has been quite a long wait for Chapters 3 and 4. Earlier this year, Fox announced that both of the new chapters would be releasing in 2025, and because of this, I decided to go back and play through the first 2 episodes of the game. So, what is Deltarune Chapters 1 and 2? Are they as good as Undertale, and should you check them out? Let's find out in this week's episode of the Beat Your Backlog podcast. But before we get into the podcast, I would like to remind you that you can support the podcast on Patreon. If you do, you will gain access to all of my content 24 hours early, and you will unlock the Beat Your Backlog's bonus vault, which will be filled up with exclusive podcasts only for Patreon supporters. If you're interested in supporting my one-man show, head over to patreon.com/beatyourbacklog or click on the link in the description of the episode. And as always, I'd like to say a thank you to our Patreon supporters, Hopple and Kazapi, aka Casper, for supporting the podcast. Or maybe it's Kazapi. I need to clarify how to say it. But yeah, thank you guys for supporting the podcast. And if you are a Patreon member, you get access to 2 episodes of the bonus vault that are up so far. The first one is my top 10 Nintendo games released on the Nintendo Switch. And my second one, which I posted last week, is my top 10 indie games ever. So yeah, if you want to listen to those episodes, consider becoming a Patreon. And without further ado, let's get on to the podcast and the review of Deltarune. And the way I've broken it up is first I'm going to talk about Deltarune Chapter 1, because obviously most of the content of the game is in Chapter 1, and Chapter 2 is a continuation of that. And as always, we will start with the beginning, because that is kind of, I think the name of the chapter is the beginning. And if you've played Undertale, you will understand and recognize 90% of Deltarune. The setting is very reminiscent of the Underground, the world where the monsters live. So if you've not played Undertale, just a bit of context on Undertale. Undertale is a story about a little human child that falls through a hole in the ground and ends up in this world called the Underground, which is inhabited by monsters. And this world is kind of a little bit like ramshackle, and these monsters, some of them are very aggressive towards humans, and others are very friendly towards them. And as you progress through the world, you get this sort of uneasiness that not everything is as it seems here. And like I said, I've never actually finished the story, but the way that you can play the game is you can go down 2 routes. You can go the pacifist route, where you don't attack anyone and you just try to make everyone surrender to you in battle, or there is the genocide route, where you kill absolutely everyone, and depending on the path you take, it affects the story. So this is kind of where it seems that this game is set to. But it's maybe set at a different point in the Underground's kind of life cycle. Because this Underground, where it's not as run down and kind of like post-apocalyptic as Undertale's Underground, this is going to be hard to say. This Underground is a bit more like a 1950s suburban America. So maybe this is before Undertale. I don't know. I don't actually know what the lore is for Deltarune, or if they are actually tied at all. But I assume they must be. But anyway, you play as a character called Chris, who is a human teenager living in the world of monsters. And during school, Chris is paired with a rather antisocial monster called Susie on a group project. Susie is sort of like the badass of the school in quotation marks. Everyone's kind of scared of her for some reason because she's quite aggressive, but also looks kind of cool. She sort of reminds me of the character John Bender from The Breakfast Club, of kind of like this rebel without a cause. You know, everyone kind of is a bit scared and annoyed of him, but he turns out to be kind of like a charming and kind of like misunderstood. That's kind of how Susie feels. And yeah, before starting their group project, Chris and Susie are tasked with getting some chalk from a supply closet because Susie ate the last stick of chalk in the classroom. And when they get there, they have a kind of like a Chronicles of Narnia-like moment of falling through a closet into a weird and mysterious land called the Dark World. And after a short time of exploring the world, they are introduced to a character called Ralsei, who informs them that they are something called lighters and are destined to save the Dark World from its current plight. Ralsei joins the party and sets them the task of sealing the Dark Fountain, which is being guarded by a corrupted king that is enslaving the population of the world. However, it says she, but you find out later on that I wrote she, but it's actually he. However, he insists that violence not be used to achieve your task and asks you to use kindness to persuade the monsters of the Dark World to join your cause. So again, this is very Undertale-ish, where you can decide to either do a pacifist run and do a genocide run. I think we'll get onto it a little bit later, which run I did. But yeah, anyway, on with the story. And it's around this time that you are introduced to a character called Lancer, who is an Ace of Spades themed character, who is sort of like a wannabe bad guy, and just so happens to be the son of the corrupted king. Susie decides that actually being nice is not really in her wheelhouse and decides to join Lancer and his evil team. As you progress through the story, you soon work out that Lancer and Susie are actually not that bad at all, and you end up convincing them to join your team, and you set out to go and persuade Lancer's father to close the Dark Fountain once and for all. And yeah, I really like the story in Deltarune. It's great, and if you've played Undertale, you can kind of know what to expect. Chris is the same protagonist more or less than in Undertale. Like, they even look very similar. They are a silent protagonist, and the story is mostly just told to you via Susie and Ralsei. The writing is very, very funny and witty. It's also fourth wall breaking, which is like what I think helped make Undertale so popular. And the gags and the writing is just filled with sort of gags aplenty. And yeah, I was very invested in the story throughout my 2.5 to 3 hours of gameplay, and felt that the pacing of it was very, very snappy. I never really felt like I needed to skip dialogue or cutscenes because I was getting bored. There is some vagueness going on to what is actually happening in the story and where this story fits into the wider Toby Fox universe. Like I said, if you seem to awaken in the same house with the same mother as the character from Undertale, but it's not really explained so far in the story. However, I must say, like, I did find it much easier to follow what was going on with the plot in this game than in Undertale. Like I said, Undertale is very... the story is quite simplistic in the sense of, like, you're trying to get back to the human world, but like I said, there is something sinister going on in the monsters world that you're not really aware of until you get towards the end of the game. Like I said, I never managed to beat the game because I just did not like the combat in the game, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Whereas this story, maybe because it's episodic and way shorter and more condensed, the story is very just easy to follow. It's like you arrive and you are given a quest to go and close this Dark Fountain and beat this king, and along the way you there is like a few other things that you can do, and characters that you can meet, and the stories can diverge slightly, but yeah, it's way more easier to follow than Undertale's, and because of that I actually enjoyed the story a bit more than Undertale. And the story isn't the only thing I prefer to Undertale's. Also, the combat I quite like in Deltarune. It's very different to that of Undertale in the sense that, like, it's now like a party-based, turn-based more like JRPG sort of combat, where your party of 3 go up against enemies of 3 to 4. However, just like in Undertale, there are 2 ways you can approach combat in Deltarune. The first way is peacefully, as Ralsei keeps encouraging you to try and do, to be pacifist in battles by acting instead of attacking. In doing so, he claims that you will get a peaceful ending to the game, which is quite interesting that it tells you that so early on. And doing acts make an enemy friendlier towards you, and if you manage to make them completely friendly. Their name will appear in yellow in the battle menu, meaning you can spare them. And if you manage to spare all the enemies in the fight, the battle will be over and you will be rewarded with dark dollars. Or you can approach combat violently, which Susie encourages you to do, so that you should basically hit with your sword first and then ask questions later. And I guess you would say this is the more traditional RPG approach than what we used to. But here, yeah, you go in with physical or magical attacks to do damage and eventually defeat enemies. I decided to go for the pacifist route and not hurt the enemies, because I think this is the more interesting one, especially to the story. Again, I did the same with Undertale, and I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't ever finish it. Nevertheless, though, just because you are being nice to the enemies does not mean that they will be nice to you. So they will still attack you even if you aren't attacking them. And this is where more of the Undertale mechanics come in. So just like in Undertale, whenever an enemy attacks you, your soul, which is represented by a pixelated red hat, will appear on the screen surrounded by a green square. And when the enemies attack, they will basically shoot or throw or do whatever. But yeah, they will shoot bullets or projectiles towards your heart. And if they hit it, you lose health. And you basically then have to move your heart around with the left joystick to make sure that you are dodging the attacks that come in. Yeah, the aim is to dodge as many projectiles as possible to take as little damage as possible. And even though this is very similar to Undertale, I much prefer the combat in Deltarune than in Undertale, because I feel like Undertale's combat is very, very vague. Like, especially if you're trying to do a pacifist run. Like in Undertale, they also have, I can't remember what it's called, but they have the same thing as what is called acts in this game, where you do an act and you see how the enemy responds. And if the enemy responds peacefully, that means that they like that act. And if you keep doing it, you will then get them to like you enough for you to spare them. And I think that's the case in Undertale too. But Undertale is it gives you a lot of mixed messages as to, did an enemy like that or not? So in Undertale, it felt way more experimental, of like, I'm not really sure if what I'm doing is correct or if I'm just doing the wrong thing over and over again. And obviously, if the enemy is attacking you as you're experimenting and you run out of health, then you die and the fight's over for you. So I think it's much better kind of communicated in Deltarune which acts are actually working, and then you know exactly when you can spare an enemy. Whereas in Undertale, I felt like I was just kind of like, kind of doing a leap of faith in every single battle and just hoping that something was working so that I could then free the enemy. So yeah, and in Undertale, because that communication wasn't as clear, I was dying a lot, which is why I got frustrated with the game and never ended up finishing it. So I do prefer Deltarune's kind of battles, sort of the combat in general, like the more turn-based RPG part of it as well. That you have sort of companions there who can heal you if you need them to, or they can also use an item on you to heal you, or an item on themselves to heal them. The only thing is that you have sort of like a mana bar that needs to be filled up, and you can fill that up usually by blocking or kind of like waiting out turns, which will then get it up to a certain level. And once it's there, then Susie or else I can use magical attacks or magical kind of buffs to buff the whole team or just one character. So that's how the combat works. So we've talked about the story and the combat, and next I want to talk about the art of the game, because although I think Toby Fox and what he produces is very kind of like genius, I've always never really been that impressed by his art style. And I do think that both Deltarune and Undertale look a little like, they look like okay, like they're nothing great. If you don't know the games, they're very kind of simplistic looking pixel art, and they have these very monstrous looking character designs to them. However, that's one thing where I think there is a strength. Like I do think especially in Undertale, his character designs are great. There are so many like iconic and memorable characters from that game that even me, who's never finished it, knows. And it's interesting because in that game, some of his characters have even kind of broken through into the more mainline video game industry. So, for example, one of his characters called Sans, who, even if you've never played Undertale or maybe even heard of Undertale, you will recognize Sans because he became such like a iconic video game character. Like everyone knows Sans. He's a skeleton wearing like a blue hoodie with a red eye, and plays an integral part in Undertale in the story, which I never actually got to. I just know that he did that because that's like such a cultural thing that this character is somehow good or bad in the story. And he even appeared as like a skin in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. But yeah, I don't think that the character designs are as iconic in Deltarune. Most of them you had seen before in Undertale, so like a lot of the monsters reappear here, the monster types. Even like the new ones like Lancer, who are unique. He does just feel a little bit like of a skin swap from other characters from Undertales too. Like he feels like a little bit of a more playful version of Sans, which is kind of like a little bit underwhelming. This doesn't really like happen actually in episode 2 or in chapter 2. I do think like the characters become a bit stronger there, but then again, I also didn't like the characters as much there as actually in chapter 1, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, so chapter 1, it's a kind of like a great introduction to Toby Fox, in a sense of like, if you've never seen his games before, this is exactly what Undertale is. It's the same thing as this, but I think chapter 1 has some improvements, especially to the combat and also to the kind of communication of what's going on in the story than Undertale. And personally, I preferred it. And after finishing the game, I was really interested to see what was going to happen to the trio of Chris, Susie, and Ralsei. So more or less, finishing chapter 1, it definitely has a definitive ending to the end of the chapter. So I was kind of like, well, what's going to happen next? Like, are we coming back to this world? Is the king going to make a resurgence? Is Lancer going to turn evil? Something like that? Or are we going to move on to literally like a new chapter? I as soon as I finished this one, I loaded up chapter 2. And the answer to the question above is we are going to a different world. So this section of the podcast is called A Cyber World, which is also the name of the chapter. And you can maybe tell, or maybe I didn't actually, now that I think about it, maybe I didn't explain kind of the theme of the world of chapter 1. So chapter 1 is like, because you're in the storage closet where you fall in, it's filled with like board games and card games or whatever. So the whole world is based around those things. That's why Lancer has like an ace of spades as his kind of symbol or his character. In this one, in a cyber world, we are in a more cyber setting, which we will kind of get into in the story. So like I said, the answer to the question that I asked, what will happen next, is that we are going to a different dark world because a mysterious character known as the Knight is creating dark worlds. And this time it is in the computer lab of the library. So after meeting back up with Ralsei, Chris and Susie enter the Dark World and find that it is ruled by a computer called Queen. They also discover that their classmates Noelle and Birdley have been dragged into this world too, and have been unwillingly and kind of willingly recruited to the Queen's side as her minions. Our trio of heroes set off to rescue their two classmates and reach the Dark Fountain of the world to seal it for good and restore the Darkers of the world to their once peaceful state. The cyber world of chapter 2 is very, very cool. I do prefer it to the first game. It looks very, very much like a how to say it? Like, it looks like a future Metropolis, but what people 50 years ago think a Metropolis would be, if you know what I mean. So if you've ever seen like the original Tron movie, like from the 80s, when they are thinking of like, this is what the future will look like, that's kind of how the cyber world looks. So it's very much like these old neon sort of computer graphics where everything is made out of rectangles and squares. That's how the world looks. But I really, really like the aesthetic of it, and the world itself. It's a future metropolis. It has huge neon ad signs everywhere. It has busy highways packed full with cars stuck in traffic, and the story is mostly set around you rescuing one of the new characters. Well, she's not new. She was in the first one, but one of the new main characters, Noelle, who is like a deer-looking monster, who seems to have a crush on Susie. And it's kind of like the nice part about this chapter is it's quite cute seeing this awkward relationship blossom between Susie and Noelle as they both kind of realize, I think, that they like each other. But it's also kind of like a bit cringy with the other new character who's called Beardley or Birdley, who is a bird-looking monster, who is trying his hardest to impress Noelle in a very kind of like gamer with a capital G way. He's trying to play like the hero in this story, and she takes the role of kind of the damsel in distress, and he's trying to go out of his way to protect her and make sure that nothing bad happens to her, even though he ends up being kind of like a bad guy in the story. And what I really liked this too is that like you seemingly have some influence over the love affairs of all of the characters in the story. So there are parts where you get to decide like should Chris kind of pursue Noelle's affection, or should Chris try to pursue Ralzai's affection or Susie's. So you can kind of choose which relationships you want to build. The game was mostly giving hints of like Noelle and Susie like each other, so I kind of was like, all right, I just want to let that play out and see what happens, which I did. And it was kind of interesting, or it will be interesting to see in future chapters if this decision affects the story, because your save is kind of saved between the chapters, so any decisions or if you decided to go do the violent course in chapter 1, that will be kind of remembered in chapter 2. So if any of these decisions will be saved and play a big role later on in the story when we get into chapters 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Because I certainly hope it does, because that would be cool if in chapter 6 something happens because of a decision you made in chapter 2 and it all comes back around. That would be awesome. However, the way the rollout of the of the chapters, if chapter 6 comes in 10 years, and you won't remember anyway what you decided in chapter 2. So yeah. Anyway, there are one other main new character in this chapter called Queen, I guess. And she's a computer that has become corrupted and now wants to recruit and force Noelle to create another dark fountain in the cyber world. However, doing this will cause an apocalyptic event called the Roaring, so our heroes have to stop her. And as a bad guy, or girl, I guess, Queen felt much more integral to the story than the King in the first chapter. And I like that she also was annoyed by Beardley's antics and even decides to team up with you for a while to avoid him. Nevertheless, in general, I did not like the story as much as the first game, because I think Lancer and his relationship to Susie add a lot of humour and charm to the game, which is missing slightly here. Here, the story is heavily focused on Noelle, who comes across as a typical kind of damsel in distress, and other than her kind of pining for Susie, she's not really that interesting as a character. And I think in future chapters, she will probably become more integral to the overarching plot of the game. However, in this chapter, she just feels a little bit of a drag compared to the main trio of characters in the first chapter, plus Lancer. The game does the age-old, at the end of it, the kind of spoilers, like, was it all a dream plotline with Noelle and Beardley when they return to the real world, which I wasn't a fan of. I was like, what was the point of all of this if they think it was all just a dream, which was a shame. So yeah, I do think that the supporting cast, even though there was 2 of them, and the King in the first chapter, you don't really meet him at all until the very final fight. Like as a bad guy, he isn't part of the story at all. I think Queen is a better bad guy in that sense, and is more interesting, and like I said, is funny, and she has like a very cool design of like her head looks like the head of a xenomorph from the Aliens movies, and then she has these cool eyes where it kind of looks like ski goggles, and then her emotion is written as a word on her eyes. So if you think something's funny, it'll say like LOL. Very cool design. Otherwise, I also was kind of thinking about, I'm not really sure how I feel about each chapter potentially opening up a new dark world in different locations of the underground. Like, it gives the chapters a lot of freedom to be able to really be about anything. But since the game is planned to have 7 chapters in total, I think the template of Chris, Susie, and Ralzai entering a new dark world in every single chapter and then closing a dark fountain there might get a little bit boring. I hope that maybe, I'm pretty sure with the ending of this game, the next chapter is also going to be we're entering a new dark world, and probably one based in a TV, which is interesting. But I kind of hope that maybe then after that it's more about like the trio, instead of going into close the fountains, they're trying to work out who and why these dark worlds are being created. I think that would be more interesting in the plot, because I don't want to spoil it, but as the player, you know who the knight is, so you know who is creating these dark worlds. The characters don't know, so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of find this out and what they do to try to stop it, which is cool. But yeah, then going on to the gameplay. So the gameplay in chapter 2 is pretty much the same as chapter 1, but it's definitely been refined and polished to make it feel even better. So in battles, you can now see how close you are to actually winning an enemy over so that you can spare them, which makes battles much more easier to understand and gets rid of the guessing game of, is this act actually doing something? So whenever you do an act, it will show you like plus 20% to the friendliness of the enemy that you're attacking. So okay, I need to do this act 5 times, and then I'll be able to spare them. I also liked in this game that there seemed to be a lot more team acts where there was like little mini games involved. So there's one where there are these enemies that look like they've been like plugged in, like their faces have become like a plug, and they have a cord that goes up that's kind of hanging them like a puppet. And one of the acts is Susie picks up Chris and throws him like a spear to cut the cord, and you have to, there's like a mini game where an archer, the throw is moving up and down, and then the enemies are moving up and down, and there's like weak points on their cables that you have to hit with Chris. So there's like things like that, but that make the combat a bit more engaging and more fun. And and also just again like the general sort of feeling of polishing combat. Like there are new sprites and animations there that make the combat in general just more engaging. So for one example, I had there's like one act that you can do with Noelle, which is called something like Take Care. And you do it to an enemy, and when you do it, Chris, Susie, and Noelle all change into like nurses' outfits, and they're like holding trays with like soup on, and then that kind of like wins over the enemy, and then I think even Noelle like accidentally falls over, and like the soup goes flying or something like that. So it's just these nice little touches that you can tell, like, okay, for the chapter 2, they're just making these little improvements to just continuously like it just made the game feel a little bit better. Like make these small improvements to just give it more polish, and it definitely feels that way, which I really liked. So I'm kind of excited to see what chapter 3 has in store for us, like what little quality of life or visual tweaks they've made or improvements they've made for these chapters coming up. In addition, there is a new feature in the game that lets you basically fill up a bestiary of enemies, which was quite random but interesting. And if you collect a certain amount of enemies by defeating them in battle, they will turn up at Ralsei's castle and eventually will come and help you out at the end of the game. So this was just like a nice addition. I think it's almost certainly scripted though, because if you just play the game normally, you will collect all of the enemies that you need. It's not like you have to like really go off and search for them. It's just kind of like you will just randomly encounter them. But it's kind of nice, and like I said, it's kind of, I wasn't really sure. I was like, why am I doing this? And then at the end, you find out why, and you're like, okay, that's cool. But yeah, I enjoyed the little changes. Like I said, it was very much more of the same, but it's just like felt like the next iteration of that, which was nice. The only thing that I didn't like about the combat though is that this game does a gaming sin, at least for me, of making the final boss battle a mechanic that's barely or not. It is done one time in this game, like once, but basing the whole final boss battle around the mechanic that is barely in the game at all. I won't spoil what it is, but I hate it when games do that. Like, it really reminds me of the ending of Uncharted 4, where you're fighting, it's like a sword fight, and you have to like parry and attack and counter with Nathan Drake. And again, like, this isn't in the game at all until the very final fight, so you just kind of like, okay, you've honed your skills the entire time for battles, and then the final battle is here's something completely different, which then you have to learn how to do. So for me, that's a very big gaming sin, which I don't like. So it was a bit annoying that they did it in this game. And finally, the last big change I would say is that this game is much more, or this chapter is much more puzzle focused than the original one. And I actually enjoyed this change because it kind of breaks up the pattern of you being given a lot of story and then going into just combat and then going back into story and going back into combat. The puzzles sort of slowed things down a little bit, which was nice, and they aren't very difficult to do. It's usually revolves around you trying to get a line of mice out of one mouse hole to another, whilst scaring Noelle in the meantime. So if you make the mice run past Noelle, she'll jump, and then maybe she jumps over like a force field onto a button that then stops the force field and means you can walk through. So yeah, just very simple puzzles, but just very Toby Fox in their kind of design of like they're kind of silly, but also like nice breaks in the pace of the game, which was welcomed. And then, yeah, going on to the art and sound of this game, as discussed before, I prefer the style of the cyber world. It feels way more kind of 80s neon slash 80s video game than the gothic fantasy of Chapter 1, which I liked a lot. Like I said, I really like the Queen's design and her kind of xenomorph-like head. And I also think the music in this game is kind of like the next level. Chapter 1's music was good. Undertale's music is great, and I would put Chapter 2's music also on the level of great. I especially like the track called A Cyber's World. I think it's my new favourite kind of track from a Toby Fox game. Before it was Megalovania, but now A Cyber World definitely is up there, so that's kind of something that is like quite impressive from this smaller scale game. And because Megalovania is like, well, for me anyway, it's like an iconic music track. So yeah, it's very cool that this chapter has such a great soundtrack. But yeah, so guys, that was kind of the review of the two games. It was quite weird for me reviewing two games in one podcast episode, but I was like, there's no point doing two episodes for these kind of two shortish games. I think depending what the release date or the release rollout for chapters 3 and 4 are, I might do them separately if there's like a few months between them, or if they release close to each other, I'll do them back to back. But it still leaves us the question of, should you play Deltarune chapters 1 and 2? And if you have a couple of evenings to spare, you should definitely check out Deltarune chapters 1 and 2, especially if you're an Undertale fan. The story is peak Toby Fox and is filled with jokes, laughs and likeable characters, which will make your roughly 6 to 7 hour playtime go by in a flash. The first two chapters left me wanting more, so I'm excited to see what comes next with Chris and the gang in chapter 3. The game has made some much needed improvements to its combat system. Combat feels fun and is something I look forward to, which was not the case for me in Undertale, and it is made even better in Chapter 2 with small improvements to the quality of life and presentation of battles. Furthermore, like Undertale, I like the option of taking the game on peacefully or violently because of the forking outcomes of the story, even if the conclusion of Deltarune's saga will only have one ending. In addition, the music in both chapters is great. Toby Fox never fails to impress me with music in his games, and Deltarune is definitely on the same level as Undertale for catchy tunes. Chapter 2 even has my new favourite Toby Fox video game track in it, knocking Undertale's Megalovania off of the throne. Finally, both chapters are still completely free to download, and you can play the full chapters with the free download, so why not download it and check it out for yourself. So yeah, guys, that has been episode 57 of the Beat Your Backlog podcast. Yeah, I actually had 56 wrote in the introduction. That's why I kind of stuttered on the introduction, but never mind. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, I would love to know, have you played Deltarune chapters 1 and 2, or do you think I should go back and play Undertale? If you're a Spotify listener, you can let me know by commenting on the episode, and if you are listening elsewhere, let me know on social media by @ing me on Blue Sky, Beat Your Backlog podcast, or on Instagram at BYB_podcast, or you can of course come and join the Discord. The link is in the description. Also, if you are interested, you can check out my full written review of both chapters over on Patreon. The link will be in the description of the podcast. And speaking of Patreon, if you enjoyed the episode and would like to show your support, consider joining my Patreon at the $2 or $5 tier. If you do, you will get access to all of my content 24 hours before everyone else and get access to my Patreon exclusive podcast, Beat Your Backlog Bonus. I just posted episode 2 of the podcast, listing my top 10 indie games ever. Will Deltarune be in that top 10 list? Well, if you want to find out, you can support on Patreon and get the podcast episode there. And if you're in the mood to listen to more of my content that is not on Patreon, especially one about a great indie game, check out episode 35 of the podcast about Duck Detective and the Secret Salami. And before you go, if you're a new listener or you haven't done so already, please review the podcast on whatever podcast service you are listening on. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. But yeah, please review the podcast with 5 stars, because that really helps new people find the podcast. It means the algorithm will suggest the podcast to more people. And if you can do that, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I definitely enjoyed this game, and I hope people go out and try it themselves. And we will see you in the next episode, which will probably be either about Monument Valley or Gravity Rush. So look forward to that one. Bye bye.